Hi, I'm Marie. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I've been working with a few people that have asked for help on patterns for crochet and knitting and loom knitting, and I've made a very basic video to get you started with the round looms, doing various projects that would be possible with a few basic stitches. So I have a video coming up that's about casting on, how to get your stitches on, how to work a couple different ways, and then how to take your project off and finish it. I hope you enjoy it and learn something. If you have questions or suggestions for other videos, please let me know. Thanks for stopping by. This is one style of knitting loom. There are others, but I'm going to focus on the round looms for this video. I'm going to show you first what can be done. You can use these to knit in the round. Most people like to knit hats with them, and this is one I've started already. The fabric comes out from the inside and grows as you knit each of the pegs in the round. So hats are one possibility. You could also seam this up at the bottom and make a bag, and you can make, here's a hat that's already been done. You can roll up and make a little brim to make it a little bit shorter if you like. This would be a very small child size hat. And you can also knit flat pieces, so you could do a scarf such as this. So both are possible even though you're knitting in the round. There's ways, and I'm going to show you as we begin working how to knit both in the round and flat pieces such as a scarf, or pieces that could be put together by seaming to make larger pieces. The first thing you need to do to create a piece is to get stitches put on the loom, just like I've started this piece and have been knitting about maybe 10 or 12 rounds. So in making a hat, you're going to go all the way around, and I'm going to demonstrate on this loom how you get it set up. Since there are fewer pegs, won't take me as much time to do that. Same thing for any size. There are 4 different sizes, and they all work the same way. The first thing is, most of the looms have this peg that is an anchor peg. That's not totally necessary, but I find it's very helpful. It's an anchor peg so that you can wrap your yarn around it to begin, and then we're going to start wrapping the yarn around the loom as our beginning for the hat or the scarf or whatever piece we're making. I'm going to take just a couple turns, leave about 5-6 inches, and then just wrap 2 or 3 times around. That secures the piece. There are a number of ways to cast on. I'm going to show you probably the most basic and the one that most people learn first. There are other cast on techniques which I could demonstrate later that embellish or are used for certain particular purposes. But for this one, this is a good general cast on, and it's called an ewrap cast on. I'm going to take the yarn and make the cursive lowercase e. To do that, the yarn goes to the inside. It's going to pass the first peg that I'm going to wrap, and then wrap around to the front, go to the back, and cross in the back. And then I'm going to go to the next peg. I'm going to go past the peg, bring the yarn past the peg, and around the peg so that it again crosses in the back. As I do that, I put my finger in to just indent it a little bit. That gives me some slack in the stitch so that it is not too tight. Usually I go in this direction. You can also start and go the other direction, so for some people it may be more comfortable instead of going one direction to work the opposite way. So I can do that. You still go past the peg on the inside, come to the front, wrap around the peg, and then again go to the back, and that's where your yarn crosses in the back. go to the next peg and wrap around. You pass by, wrap around, and then the yarn crosses in the back. And again, I want to keep my finger, so I'm going to indent just a little bit, gives you some slack again. The worst thing you can do is put these stitches on too tight, and then you have to struggle to work them. So I'm wrapping around, and I just change fingers to use to indent. Keep a little bit of slack in there. I'm going to wrap around each peg until I get back to the starting peg. And again, they're crossing in the back. Okay, that is the final peg. Now, in order to knit, I need to have stitches that I can move off of this, just like I have done here, so that you can form the stitches. So I need to make at least one more wrap. The traditional one starts with 2 wraps. I know I'm back at the beginning because I can see each peg has been wrapped once, and I'm back to my anchor peg. I always use this as my starting point, whether I'm going clockwise or counterclockwise. I'm going to do the same thing as I just did, wrapping each peg again, making sure that they have a little bit of slack. There is a tool that you use, it's referred to as a pick, and if you have your stitches too tight, you can actually bend or break the pick, and you don't want to do that. It also makes you struggle to work them off, which makes your hand tired and you don't want to do it anymore. Almost back to the beginning. And I now have my loom set up so that I can work the first row of knitting. I've got my loom set up with the 2 wraps around using ewraps, and now I'm going to work the stitches off. I'd like to work them off in the same order in which I did them originally. The first thing that I do, though, is I work the last stitch that I did. The reason for that is if I don't secure that, they can start just popping off and you have to wrap them again. So I suggest that when you work these, that you work the last stitch first and then continue around in that direction. To work these off, and this is the actual knit stitch, we're going to take the tool and we're going to go into the bottom loop, grab that loop with our pick, and then we're going to pull it up and over the other top wrap, and then it goes off the peg into the back. That's what made this other one grow going down the center of the loom. I'm going to do that all the way around. Now that I have that secured, this is not going to go anywhere. My yarn is secure here. Next one, I go to the bottom loop, insert the pick and pull it up and over. It should go up pretty easily. You shouldn't have to struggle. Pick up the bottom loop, go up and over, and you're going to do that the whole way around. The way I'm holding it is one of the ways you can do this. Another way that you can hold your loom is to hold it towards you like this, and then you insert your pick this way. So I'm going to pick up from the back to the front and just move that bottom loop over the one that's on top. So it's up to you how you're going to hold your loom. Experiment, find out what you like better. I'm going to work all the way around, and then we have to prepare for a second row of knit stitches. If you are a knitter and you look at the stitches this produces, you will find that the stitch is twisted. That is the nature of doing this knit stitch on the loom. I'm going to show you a different way, different stitch in a little bit that looks like an actual needle knitted knit stitch. Okay, I'm all the way around. I can check and make sure every peg has just one wrap on it. They do. Might want to push them down just a little bit to make sure I've got room, because now I have to wrap the loom again. The yarn is coming from my last stitch. I'm going to go around and E-wrap again on every peg, remembering to keep them loose. Don't want them too tight so that you have to struggle. And coming to the last peg, wrap that one, and then use your tool to secure it. So I'm picking up that bottom loop and pushing it over and off the top of the peg. Goes into the inside where your stitches are going to form. It's going to take you probably 6 to 8 rows before you start seeing your fabric. It's all hidden behind the base of the loom. And I'm just going to go around same way as I did before, either holding the loom this way, or again, if you prefer, you can hold it this way. And you'll get it at a convenient place where you feel comfortable. So I'm going to finish this round, and then the next thing would be to repeat the wrap. The 2 steps are you put the stitches on by doing the E-wrap, and then you use your pick to pull them off one by one. It's that simple. Before I continue, I wanted to talk about the types of yarn that you use with these. I have used a number 6 very bulky yarn with this. These are considered a medium gauge loom, and you can see there's a pretty good distance between the pegs. That means you're going to have a lot of space between stitches. I like to have things that are nice and warm, and if you've ever tried to wear something like this, it can be a little chilly when that wind blows between the stitches. So this is a medium gauge loom. I like a bulkier yarn, so this is your number 6 super bulky weight, and I like that probably the best for doing these looms. On this blue loom that I was just doing, this is a number 5 chunky or bulky yarn, so it's just a little bit thinner, and this is going to be a thinner weave or knit than the other 6. I'm going to show you now a different stitch. This was a basic E-wrap stitch. I'm going to show you a flat stitch, and I'm going to work on this large loom to do a flat piece. It could be the beginning of a scarf. You could wrap all the way around and not connect it, and then you would have a panel, let's say, that you could make for a blanket, and make 5 or 6 of those panels have a nice size blanket. I have selected the standard number 4 weight, which is called a medium weight or a worsted weight yarn, and I'm going to double strand this. So I'm holding 2. I've got a light and dark purple, and I'm going to hold the 2 of those together just as if they were one strand, and use those together. That adds more bulk to it and tightens up the stitches a little bit. I'm going to go back to my start. Here's the turning peg, or the anchor peg rather, and I'm going to anchor my yarn here as I did previously, and then I'm going to start wrapping maybe 10 or 12 pegs. This is going to be a smaller piece, perhaps beginning of a scarf, and you just wrap as I did before, the same ewrap for the number of pegs that you want to do, and I'm going to stop with that. So that's my pegs. Now it's a little difficult. I can wrap this one a second time, but one of the methods is to use this as a turning peg, and we're not going to work this one the first time, but we're going to come across and we're going to wrap in the opposite direction. Just like I was wrapping by coming past the peg, going back around the peg and behind it, I'm going to do the same thing with going back. This time I have to work in this direction. So what I need to do is pass this peg, and I'm going to wrap this one and then come back around, and I'm going to go behind it, come this way with the wrap so that it wraps and it crosses in back, and then I go behind the next one. You always pass the peg on the ewrap and then come back around it. And if you can visualize the motion that I'm making, it is that lowercase e in cursive. That's what you're doing. And I'm going to wrap back to the first peg, and I have 2 wraps on everything. I could count that as a wrap, or I could just count that as just the turning peg. So there's 2 different ways of treating it. Again, I'm going to take the tool, the pick, and just pick up the bottom row of stitches, bottom row of wraps, push it over the top wrap and off to the center of the loom. And you have to watch that you don't get into part of the second one. You do have to watch a little bit when you're doing double strand that you catch them appropriately. Now this one I probably could go ahead and count, and just, it might look a little bit different, but we're set now. Okay, and that's something, again, you have to decide. I can just turn here and go around, or I can count it as a stitch, or I can just use it as a turn, and then it gets knitted every other row. So I've finished here. I'm going to begin working this one, and I go back and work in the opposite direction. I can continue this for my whole project, and this is the ewrap stitch, or I can switch. I'm going to show you a second stitch, which is called the flat stitch, that works a little differently from this. We've gotten it started, we have an edge now, and I'm going to begin with a flat stitch. With the flat stitch, you're just going to lay the yarn across the pegs, and you're going to work them one at a time. So I'm going to just put the yarn across, and then I'm going to take the loop that's on the particular peg, lift it up and over to the back, lift this one up and over, goes off in the back. So I'm just laying the working yarn over the peg, get both strands, and you have to watch. Sometimes one of them might want to just fall off the back without being caught, so that's why I was looking back to make sure. When you're working with a double strand of yarn, you just have to be sure that you've caught both of those. There's also something called splitting the yarn, which can happen particularly with yarn that's not real tightly spun, that you get into the middle, or a lot of them have like 4 strands that are worked together. You can get 3 of them and leave one behind, and you don't want to do that. Okay, make sure I caught that darker purple, and we've got that one done. Then I'm going to work back the same way. That was called the flat stitch. I'm going to work back across in the other direction and just pull the bottom over that yarn that's lying on top of the peg. Do that all the way across. The flat stitch will look like a traditional knit stitch. As I said earlier, when you do the ewrap, it's twisted. So it looks like a twisted knit stitch. If you can imagine like a horseshoe, your knit stitches usually look sort of like a horseshoe with the sides coming down and not crossing. With doing the ewrap, it does make them cross at the bottom of the stitch. This stitch, the flat stitch, is a tighter stitch than the ewrap stitch. So a hat made on this loom with the ewrap and another one made on the same loom with the flat stitch are going to have 2 different sizes. So you have to be careful. It takes a little experimenting to find out how it's going to be. And that is the flat stitch. You just keep laying the yarn over, pulling the bottom part over the yarn that's resting on top of it. That's all there is to the flat stitch. I have finished the project. That could be a hat. Might be a little bit short, but this is the end of my yarn using for the demo piece. There's 2 ways to get the stitches off, or 2 ways that I will show you. There's other ways of binding off, they call it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to gather this so it would be a traditional hat. And what I'm going to do now is I have left about 18 inches, 20 inches of yarn at the end of my work. And I'm going to use a yarn needle that I'm going to insert into each of the stitches one by one to get them gathered together. There are several kinds of yarn needles. One is like this that comes in about 5 different sizes. This is a traditional yarn needle. It has a big eye at the top. Might still be a little bit of a challenge to get this through. And another one that's in plastic. So if you have younger children that are working on this, you might want to use that. This one has a very blunt tip. And this is really my favorite because it's so very easy to work with. A tip, rather than trying to get this that's already split, get that together, is a lot of times I will just feed through with my thumbnail and push it and then grab it. So that is one way that works. You can wrap it around, get a crease in it, and then feed that through if that works for you. This one is so easy because basically the whole needle is the eye. So I'm going to put the yarn through that, and then I'm going to start from where I've left off in knitting. I'm going to insert the needle through the stitch And I could pull it off at this point, or I could wait, but I'd just get it free from that other peg. Inserted that, and I want to insert it in the next stitch and go around to all of the pegs. If it pops off at this point, that's fine. I would say wait and do at the end if you can. If you run out of yarn, you can take it off, because it probably need 3 times the distance around to do it like this. So I may go ahead and pop a couple of the stitches off. The problem is sometimes if you take off a couple stitches from the pegs, some of the rest of them want to follow before you're ready to do that. So we'll keep them on for a little while, but I am going to run out of yarn if I don't take some of them off. So each one of them, you get this threaded through. Making sure I don't split any of the stitches, go through part of the yarn. I'm going to take a few of these off just to take some of that out. I just about made it, but these are all secure. Now I can cinch that up a little tighter, and I have a little more yarn to finish where I left off. And I'll just let these come off as I work them. Which you can do from the beginning. You can go ahead and let them come off as you work. But it may be a little bit, particularly for a first project or for the younger children, might be a little bit easier to keep them on just so they don't come off before you're ready. Alright, and these have been caught. So I now have all of them off, and I just pull the yarn to cinch up the top, make the hole as tight as you would like. You can put a pom-pom or something up here if you would like to do that. And then what I do is, you need to work in the yarn tail. So what I do is I put that through the hole into the center and turn it inside out. And sometimes if the hole doesn't cinch up enough, I'll go back and forth a couple times to try to minimize that hole, but I will pick stitches and start working this tail in. And I'm going to use a couple different rows here. I usually zig and zag a bit, because I feel like if you just go in one row, one direction, it can pull out. You want it nice and secure. And you work that in, that's probably enough. And then this was the beginning. I would work this in as well. Not going to take time to do all of that. Knitting curls, and that's why this brim has rolled up. The edge, cast on edge, bind off edge will curl. There are ways to eliminate that, and that's something I could address in a different video, but this is just the basics to get you started. It's not a bad brim. Some of them are done. I've got a sweater done commercially that has the neckline and the cuffs of the sleeves and then the bottom all done that way. So that's one way to get it for a hat, or you could do a purse or a little cosmetic tote or something like that. The other one is this flat one, and what I'm going to do is work off a stitch at a time. And I am going to work the stitches as I was working them. I was doing the flat stitch when I left this piece. This could have been ewrap as well. I'm going to work the stitch on the first peg, the stitch on the second peg, and then I'm going to move from the second peg. I'm going to pick up this stitch, take it off of that peg, and I'm going to position it on top of the first peg. So I've moved, and I now have the second peg right here is empty. I have two on this peg, and now I'm going to knit the bottom loop over the top loop, which now that had two stitches on it, or two wraps on it. Now I'm going to, that it has one, I'm going to move that back to the second peg where it originally started, and I'm going to work the second peg. This is now peg 1, this is peg 2. Going to take this stitch and work it. Repeat what I just did. I'm also pulling just to keep a little bit of slack in there so it's not too tight. Take the second peg, move it to the first peg, and that goes over and off, and I move this stitch back. I lost the purple one, the deep purple one. That's okay. Just for demonstration, I would go back and pick that up. Okay, then I work the next stitch. And let's do that again. That purple one, maybe it was just under there. Okay, work that one, and then peg 2 stitch comes over to peg 1, and then you knit that off. Move it back to the left. You keep doing that all the way across, stitch by stitch. There are other bind offs. This is a traditional one. There are some that are worked with crochet hooks. There are many different ways to start, do your cast on, and to bind off. You can either lift it with your fingers or you can use your tool, either way. And one thing I didn't do, I left that so I could do it on camera, is the anchor peg is still wrapped. Didn't need to let it go. You can do maybe 3-4 rows and then take that off really at any time after you get your first round going. You can release that. It doesn't bother me just to let it stay. Eventually it's going to pull the bottom up a little bit, so at some point you'll probably want to take care of that. But it's okay for it to stay. And this is the last stitch. Let me get this out of the way so it doesn't look like a stitch. And I'm going to knit this together. And then at this point I would cut my yarn. That's now off of the loom. I would cut my yarn, pull it through, and then I would have a tail at the beginning and at the end here that I would work into the back, similar to what I did on the hat. Hopefully you can see this is the piece I started with the ewrap stitch, and then I moved to the flat stitch. Now these gaps are closing in. If you pull and tug on it a little bit, it'll even out a little bit even more. Probably once you wash it and wear it, it'll even out a little bit more. But you can see that these ewraps are much larger area than the flat stitch. The flat stitch is the one I told you is going to be a firmer stitch and a tighter stitch. So you can see a bit, this it would be wider if I had left it in the ewrap stitch rather than moving to the flat stitch. So that it's going to make a difference in your finished pattern size. Be aware of that. I just did this to show you the two different types of stitches. And that concludes the binding off. Thank you for staying with me. I hope you've enjoyed and learned how to use your looms.